They said the air of Mexico was heavy with the smell of blood. Every morning, priests climbed the great stone stairs of the temples, carrying knives made of obsidian. Every evening, the streets below ran red from what they called the duty of the gods. When the Spaniards arrived, they didn't just find a new land, they found a world that believed it could not live without killing. And what happened next would become one of the strangest turns in human history, when men who had known only fear saw for the first time that their gods were powerless. That moment would break an empire and begin another. When Hernán Cortés marched into the Valley of Mexico in 1519, he was entering the center of a religion that touched everything. The Aztecs called themselves the Mexica. They believed the sun itself had once been fed by the sacrifice of the gods, and that to keep it rising, humans must keep the payment going. It wasn't madness to them, it was math. Every heart was another day of light. Spanish soldiers wrote of the temples covered with dark crust, of drums made from human skin that shook the air, of skull racks stretching for yards. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a soldier who saw it with his own eyes, said the smell was so thick he could hardly breathe. He wrote that the steps of the great temple were slippery underfoot. To him and his comrades, it felt as though they had walked into the mouth of hell itself. The Spanish friars who came after the soldiers saw the same world, but they came unarmed. Men like Fray Pedro de Gante, Motolinia, and Bernardino de Sahagún believed that if they could break the spell of fear, they could save a continent. They began by doing something simple and unthinkable. They spoke against the gods. Motolinia wrote that the first time he preached in the open, the people looked at him as if he were mad. When he called their idols lifeless, they backed away from him, afraid the statues would strike him dead. When he lifted his hand against them, even the warriors begged him not to. He touched the idol's face. It didn't move. He pushed it. It still didn't move. Then, with the help of a few new converts, he threw it down. The crowd gasped, waiting for thunder. There was none. And for the first time in their lives, they laughed with disbelief, laughed with relief. Some fell to their knees crying. Others ran to fetch their families to see that the god was just a stone. In Tlaxcala, the small kingdom that had joined Cortés against the Aztecs, the change came fastest. When friars came there after the conquest, they found people ready to burn their old idols themselves. They tore down their shrines and brought the stones to help build the new church. They told the missionaries, "If your God has defeated ours, we will serve him." Within a few years, Tlaxcala became one of the most Christian towns in New Spain. But elsewhere, the reaction was far different. In Cholula, when friars began burning the idols of the great temple, the people panicked. A storm broke over the city that very afternoon, and many screamed that the old gods were taking revenge. The friars kept working in the rain, hammering and chanting prayers, and when the storm passed without lightning, the people stared up at the quiet sky. By sunset, they began to bring their household idols to the friars to test them, to see if they too would be silent. In Texcoco, Sahagún recorded that nobles hid the smaller idols inside walls, behind altars, under floors. When one of them cracked or fell, families took it as a sign that it had died. They said the gods were growing old. The last public human sacrifices in Mexico were recorded around 1520 during the siege of Tenochtitlan. After the city fell, Cortés ordered the destruction of the Great Temple. Spanish carpenters raised a wooden cross on the ruins. For the Aztecs, it was more than defeat, it was confusion. The friar Juan Diaz, who saw the first mass there, wrote that thousands of people watched from a distance but would not come close. When the bell rang, they threw themselves on the ground, thinking the sound was the voice of a new god. A year later, in the nearby town of Tepeyac, an old site of the mother goddess Tonantzin, people began saying they saw a woman clothed in light. The friars named her the Virgin Mary. The people called her Our Mother. Two names for the same comfort. It was the beginning of what would become the Virgin of Guadalupe, a bridge between old faith and new. Not all bowed so easily. In the Yucatan, the Maya held out for generations. When the friar Diego de Landa began burning their sacred books, the people rose up and killed every Spaniard they could find. They hid their idols in caves, believing they would awaken again when the foreigners were gone. Landa's own letters say that they prayed in secret, whispering the names of their old gods behind the names of the saints. In Oaxaca, when missionaries melted down the gold ornaments of the temples, riots broke out. Villagers rebuilt their shrines at night. Each time the friars destroyed them, more appeared deeper in the hills. It took almost 50 years before open sacrifice disappeared there. Even in central Mexico, many converts continued both religions at once. They would attend Mass in the morning and leave food for their ancestors in the evening. Friars complained that the old fire still smoldered beneath the ashes. But over the next 2 centuries, that fire turned into something new, a blend of both worlds. Some conversions were almost unbelievable. The chronicler Torquemada tells of an idol that fell from its platform during an earthquake and shattered. The priests cried that the god had chosen death. The next day they came to the friars asking to be baptized, saying, "Our gods have died, yours alone still live." In another village, a missionary dared the local priests to call down rain during a drought. They prayed for days. Nothing. He prayed once, and rain came that night. The story spread like wildfire. Whether coincidence or not, it broke the resistance of half the province. One of the most famous accounts came from Fray Bernardino de Sahagún himself. He described how, after years of teaching, some of his students, young nobles from Mexico and Texcoco, began to destroy idols on their own. He wrote that they marched into homes shouting, "Do not be slaves to stone." These things cannot see. The same people who once trembled before the gods now smash them with their bare hands. For the Spaniards, the sight was almost as shocking. Men who had crossed oceans for gold found themselves witnesses to something stranger, a civilization changing its gods before their eyes. One soldier wrote, "They came weeping, asking what they should do, as if they had been orphaned." Another said the people seemed bewildered children, fearing the sky might fall now that their gods were gone. The missionaries moved slowly. They painted pictures of Christ's life for those who could not read. They learned Nahuatl so they could explain confession and forgiveness in words people understood. They turned former temple singers into choir boys and drummers into bell ringers. They even built new churches on top of the old pyramids so that worship would happen on the same ground. To the Indians, it meant their world was still turning. Only the names had changed. By the 1530s, thousands of Indians had been baptized. Motolinia claimed he baptized 400,000 in a single year, an exaggeration, but proof of how quickly the new faith spread. Old festivals were kept but renamed. The Feast of Rain became the Feast of St. John. The Dance of the Harvest became a procession for the Virgin. Within a generation, children no longer remembered the old sacrifices. They grew up ringing the bells that replaced the death drums. Yet fragments of the past remained. In hidden corners of villages, old women still whispered to the corn and left candles for the wind. And the missionaries, many of them, chose to accept it. They said, "Better half a truth than a whole lie." So Catholicism in the Americas became something unique, part European, part native, entirely new. When the Franciscan Fray Andres de Olmos visited ancient temple sites in the mid-1500s, he found skull racks empty but still standing. He wrote that children played on them as if they were ladders. In Tenochtitlan, now Mexico City, the old pyramid of Huitzilopochtli was gone, its stones used to build the cathedral that still stands today. The city that had once been the heart of sacrifice now rang with church bells. And yet, not all fear had vanished. Many Indians believed that the old gods were not dead, only sleeping beneath the ground. They said if the Spaniards ever left, the gods would rise again. Some still say it. The fall of the Aztec gods was not just a religious event, it was a psychological one. An entire people discovered that the beings they had served for 1,000 years could be mocked, struck, and broken without punishment. For the first time, they could live without fear of divine revenge. And when that fear broke, the empire broke with it. To the Spaniards, it proved the truth of their faith. To the natives, it proved the weakness of their own. Between those two realizations, the modern Americas began. The teocalli gave way to the mission, the temple drums to the church bell, the priest's obsidian knife to the sign of the cross. A continent had traded blood for prayer, and whether one calls that salvation or conquest, it changed the world forever.